what happened that prompted Mexico to have a methane control regulation, actually the first methane control regulation in Latin America. The president of Mexico had just met with his counterparts from Canada and the US, and they had agreed to join efforts to tackle methane emissions. So my mandate was, we need a regulation. We need a methane regulation. Things began making sense once we understood the nature of methane emissions and how they could be important in addressing the climate crisis. Methane was very quickly understood by us as being really strategic. Strategic in the sense that if we could put together a regulation that would quickly limit methane emissions, then we would be making an impact. You have specific sources and not very diffuse sources. For example, if you look at the agriculture sector, it's very complex because it's all over. Whereas for oil and gas methane emissions, you have oil and gas infrastructure, you have pipelines, you have valves, you have flanges, you know where they are. And most importantly, most of the reductions of methane emissions in the oil and gas sectors were possible with known technologies and practices. And not only that, 75% of emissions could be mitigated at no net cost. So that really set the scene for pushing for a very aggressive regulation that would help the oil and gas industry be motivated to drive these emissions down. Political will, I think, is a key lever, but it's not the only one. We also put in some key ingredients in my conversations with, again, the CCAC, Cleaner Task Force, and other stakeholders, particularly the International Energy Agency and their methane emissions expert group. In my experience, what helped Mexico build a robust regulatory framework in a very short time was indeed political will, but also the fact that we had a high-level leadership. There was someone at deputy minister level leading the efforts. We also put together a very solid technical team. So people from the different departments of the agency participated in preparing this regulation, not only from the perspective of what authorizations are needed, but also what kind of inspection and verification mechanisms we need to put in there to incentivize the behavior we expect from industry. And the mandate was, we need to have a draft regulation in place in the next 10 months so we can process it and actually publish it in the public gazette. We needed a solid framework from which to derive science-based regulation. And this framework was actually the work that was being done by the team in the IEA. They had created a marginal cost of abatement curve. So this curve will show you that there are certain things that are less expensive to do and yield huge results in terms of mitigating emissions. And it will also show you where the limit to that is. That's where we found out 75% of emissions can be reduced at no net cost. Another ingredient was the fact that we had the right partners, both technical and also funding. We were accompanied in this endeavor by organizations such as EDF, also the Government of Canada, officials from the government of Colorado in the United States. The CCAC played an important role in bringing to the table the Clean Air Task Force. And along with these partners, we were able to sort of bring in all the technical expertise and the global perspective that we didn't necessarily have. We sat down with the entire industry and engaged in a very technical conversation. And actually it was very useful in terms of enhancing what our initial thoughts or approaches. Cross-sectoral alignment was crucial. So the fact that we had the environmental ministry aligned with the energy ministry with the common objective of creating this regulation by this independent agency was crucial. And then finally, advocacy. We faced a rather adversarial situation where it was very important for the think tanks and the NGOs to step up and actually put out very direct public statements as to the importance of Mexico producing these regulations. Methane can be a quick win in terms of demonstrating and achieving results. Usually the political cycles, which are short, do not provide the space for very long-term decisions that may be considered as politically costly. But in the case of methane mitigation, I think it's an absolute no-brainer and a very available quick win for incoming governments that want to mark a difference. And for perhaps those circumstances where the political will is not necessarily there to be more aggressive, I think the markets will play their part as well. Let me give an example. More and more banks and investors are asking from the projects that they put money into that they show robust climate risk management strategies. So for oil and gas projects, definitely methane action is one of the first issues that should be there on their sustainable programs and strategies. Governments are not necessarily equipped with all of the technical expertise that is needed to design and put in place a solid methane framework. Where does support come from? So what I would say is that there are resources out there that are readily available. Many of them, or the most important ones of them, are country-driven. So it's up for the countries to raise their hands and go to the appropriate partners. CCAC has a mission to help countries that demand so to build robust regulatory programs. And the way that will work is that the appropriate technical expertise will be identified and selected to provide support to specific countries. Financial resources will be put to that purpose. And that's, I think, a very important partner that governments should be thinking about. The other one example, and there are many others, is the Global Methane Hub. This is a fund that has been put together by philanthropy, which has important amounts of financial resources, but also the access to technical partners. So I think working together with instances such as the CCAC, the Global Methane Hub, think tanks such as the Clean Air Task Force, Environmental Defense Fund, EDF, and others, is where governments can look for the technical expertise and the financial resources, if needed, to bring that technical expertise to support their endeavors. It's not necessarily easy peasy, as my daughters would put it, but it's not far from that, tackling methane emissions and producing robust regulations. The knowledge is there, the technology is there, the practices are there. Now there are more and more countries that are embarking in this, and therefore there are more and more references. Not only the Mexican regulation as a reference, but there are countries in Africa that also have produced regulation. Canada, some parts of the United States, Colombia, Argentina is currently working on that as well. So there's more and more information and best practices. By the way, the International Energy Agency has a fantastic website, and their methane tracker is a very useful tool, along with the CCAC's understanding of methane roadmaps and regulatory toolkits. So there's a whole host of tools out there and information that, when we embarked into this, didn't exist and now exists. It's actually up to us to change course from previous generations' decisions and pave the road for a safer world for not only the future generations, that seems like very far in time away. It's actually, we're working for our daughters and our sons, for our grandchildren. It's not as far as it used to be imagined. There's no way of evading this. This is not only mitigating methane emissions in the oil and gas sector is not only possible, it is affordable, and it's urgent. We have ahead of us the opportunity to decrease the pace at which temperature is rising. And that opportunity are short-lived climate pollutants, particularly methane, and particularly in the oil and gas industry.